hope you had some amazing conversations. We'll have more breaks throughout the day where you can talk to people, meet new friends. But just a reminder, if you want to chat with people while we're in the panels, use the chat function. We're going to be doing reminders throughout these presentations about all of the different things happening throughout the day. Also, we'll be posting the agenda again in just a few minutes, so this way you can see what's happening today and happening tomorrow. Now we're going to start our next panel. We're so excited for this one because it was a hot topic during the last panel, and I know we got several questions on it. It's all about mis and disinformation. LYNN CHAPMAN, who is our anti-disinformation manager, and Ignacio Romero, who is our Latino anti-disinformation manager, are going to give you an overview of dis and misinformation in a panel we are calling Liar, Liar, How Disinformation Impacts Our Elections. So, Ignacio, Lisa, take it away. We're so excited for this panel.
Joining us for Liar Liar, How Disinformation Impacts Elections. I'm LYNN CHAPMAN.
And we are excited you decided to join us. We are also very excited to have some national disinformation experts here to discuss disinformation and election. I am Ignacio Romero, manager of the Latino Anti-Disinformation Program. Let's start this show.
First, I'd like to introduce Kelsey Suter, who is the Vice President of GQR, where she leads the firm's digital and communications practice. In her work, Kelsey helps organizations and campaigns understand social media's role in shaping public opinion, with a focus on right-wing disinformation. She also creates digital strategies that build trust with audiences. Since 2020, Kelsey and her team have helped advise hundreds of progressive organizations across the U.S. to detect and counter political disinformation and online attacks ahead of the presidential and midterm elections. Kelsey has an MSc in Comparative Politics from the London School of Economics and a BA in Political Science and English from the College of St. Benedict in Minnesota. Welcome, Kelsey. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you'd like our people to know here?
No, that was really thorough. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, up next, we would like to introduce my fellow compatriot from Bolivia, a woman that I admire to the highest degree, VANESSA CARDENAS, who is the Executive Director of America's Voice. She's an experienced leader, organizer, political strategist, and policy expert on immigration, political disinformation, climate change, women's political empowerment, and Latino voters. Prior to her current position, VANESSA led a social impact firm that specialized in government relations, advocacy, and communications. During her impressive career, she has worked with some of the most innovative and prestigious progressive organizations, from being the National Coalition Director at the Biden's for President campaign. She has worked at a multitude of other extraordinary organizations like ELYSE, Center for American Progress, LULAC, the World Wildfire Fund, and so many others. VANESSA, I really don't know where you get the energy to do all of this, but thank God you do. Welcome to our Progressive Summit.
Great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Ignacio. I really appreciate it.
And last but certainly not least, we would like to introduce ELYSE Martin. She is one of the two regional social listening coordinators at Progress Now. She focuses on social listening, disinformation, and meltwater trainings. Before her career at Progress Now, ELYSE was the Associate Director and Social Media and Website Content Creator for the American Historical Association, an advocacy group for historians. She also worked as a program assistant at the Folger Shakespeare Library. ELYSE, based on your experience, would you say that to be or not to be is really the questions here today? Welcome to our Progressive Summit, ELYSE.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction.
So, ELYSE, disinformation has been a very commonplace word nowadays. Can you explain to our audience what the actual definition is?
Sure. Is a form of propaganda involving the dissemination of false information with the intent to deceive or to mislead. This is different from misinformation, which is merely false or inaccurate information. The main difference between misinformation and disinformation is that disinformation is deliberate. Misinformation can be rumors that get out of hand, satirical articles that get taken seriously, insults, or even people misreading times that voting places are open and spreading it. Disinformation is very purposefully crafted. They're lies that are meant to do something specific, evoke a particular emotional reaction, to cast doubt on a particular candidate, or to keep people from voting.
Kelsey, where does information come from and how does it spread?
Yeah, so, disinformation, online lies, they can come from a lot of places and sources. To ELYSE's point, sometimes this is intentional. Sometimes people are sharing things without fact checking it and it's unintentional. We think about this in a couple different ways. Sometimes this stuff sort of starts at the fringes and it'll move its way into the mainstream. Oftentimes it's pushed along through sort of artificial amplification, like bot accounts or sort of troll farms, and then through gradually bigger and more influential accounts. We often see this route for things that are like particularly false, rumors, conspiracies, the sort of more egregious stuff. Often, though, the process is actually the opposite, where you've got like a big influential account, like a partisan media outlet or an extreme politician who will start a claim and act as sort of like a signaler. And then the rest of this sort of disinformation ecosystem will parrot it and amplify it and help that claim spread further. In 2020, former President Trump was often the sort of ultimate signaler for a lot of mis and disinformation, and then the ecosystem would sort of light up around him. But it could be really any influential account. The other point I would note is there used to be this really big focus on foreign actors, this idea that other countries like Russia or Iran were sort of puppeteering the internet for Americans. We do still see that foreign bad actors like to come in and sort of stir the pot for American social media, but a lot of this stuff is coming from Americans and sort of our own homegrown bad actors, and we are in fact sort of exporting it to a lot of countries around the world as well.
Very interesting, Kelsey. And now I want to go to the next level or point. And for that, Vanessa, I would like to bring you here.
Sure.
What is this? How is the spread of disinformation in the Latino community? Similar or different?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I love doing these panels with Kelsey and ELYSE because I learned so much. But I would say that, there's definitely a difference. Latinos consume media in English and Spanish. So they are exposed to sort of the same narratives that we are all exposed to in terms of English disinformation. So that's how it's the same. How it's different is that we are also exposed to this information that is sometimes targeted by communities, by diasporas, and we are also exposed to this information about us. And what do I mean with that is that, as you know, the largest immigrant population in the United States are Latinos from Latin America, and there's a lot of disinformation about immigrants and therefore Latinos. So not only do we get exposed to sort of like the general, the election was stolen, disinformation, we also get disinformation in language that's very targeted. So for example, in 2020, we saw disinformation around, voting, for example, by text, that you could actually vote by text and it was in Spanish. We also see disinformation trying to create racial tensions between groups. So in 2020, we also saw examples of disinformation targeting Latinos and the Jewish community in Miami. Or sometimes we see disinformation trying to create racial wedges between Latinos and African Americans in Spanish, right, targeting different communities. And as I said earlier, immigration is such a hot button issue. So we get a lot of narratives about, for example, how undocumented immigrants are voting, which actually has been a narrative that the right has been using, not just in 2020, but also in the 2022 midterms. So we really get this information from all sides. And the last point I would make is, of course, this information that is sadly also spreading in Latin America. And to the extent that diaspora communities are consuming information from Latin America, we're also getting some of that this information that by sometimes trusted messengers, right? Influencers that have roots in home countries and are also spreading this information.
And why do you think, Vanessa, that disinformation spreaders target minorities so much?
Well, I think it's a number of issues. You know, I never want to say that that Latinos are somehow, you know, more prone to fall for this information. We know that this information is a problem for everyone. It's not just Latinos or, you know, communities of color, but I do think that there are a couple of issues that are particularly prevalent in the Latino community. One, we know that there's not enough sources of accurate information, particularly in Spanish. We know that, you know, the media landscape has changed a lot, and a lot of especially local newspapers have gone under. So there isn't just the supply for the demand of information that we would need that comes from the communities that are in different languages. The other factor is that we also know that communities of color and Latinos are online more, particularly in platforms like YouTube and Facebook. And again, this is something that I learned from Kelsey. You know, Latinos, like 70% of Latinos or some high percentage like that use WhatsApp, which is not surprising because we use it as a way to communicate not just to our family here in the US, but also in Latin America. And this is also true for other diaspora communities. I also want to emphasize the fact that social media platforms are really important in Latin America. So, for example, in Venezuela, we saw that Venezuelans were relying so much on Twitter and Facebook just to communicate with each other, given sort of the regime that they have to deal with back home. Another example is when we saw the Haitian surge at the border. I don't know if you all remember that, but a lot of this information was actually spreading in Creole on Facebook, right? And that's how that's how Haitians actually were making their way up to the US, because on Facebook, people would actually tell them, you know, go to this country and take this bus and go to this town. So really mapping out the route for Haitians to come to the US. But I also want to make two points of why this info is worse in the Latino community. One is the fact that we don't have enough content moderation from the platforms. And one of I think the most shocking findings, at least for me, as I have been working on this, is that, for example, Facebook spends 87% of their efforts in English. So the rest of the world, meaning other languages, is just, you know, is what Facebook is spending in terms of content moderation. So 87% of their sort of content moderation is in English, and all the other languages is the rest of that. So when you think about it, just in terms of the resources that Facebook is putting in content moderation, it's not really addressing sort of the challenges that we face as non-English speakers. And the last thing I want to just also emphasize is that this issue of disinformation just comes on top of the other issues that we have in terms of voter obstacles and voter suppression. So, you know, we know our communities, you know, are younger, for example, so they need more information for voting. We know, you know, a big segment of our community might be low income, so they just don't have the access to the resources. It are facing a lot of obstacles in voting, which is why this information, I think, plays a bigger role in terms of deterring people from engaging.
And it is a problem that is increasing every day. Kelsey, we talked about this several times. I've been in conversations where you were talking about this topic. What else could you add about this?
Yes, I mean, Vanessa covered that very thoroughly. I agree with everything. One thing I would just emphasize, Vanessa covered this, but the idea that the platforms are not taking enough action in other languages, I think is a huge problem. And it's something that everyone should be aware of. Just anecdotally, I know that my research staff who monitor these things in both English and Spanish will regularly see things pop up in Spanish that they're like, there's no way that this would be allowed, to remain active if it were in English. So just anecdotally, we see this play out a lot. The other thing that I think Vanessa hit on that I would emphasize is the sort of substance of the disinformation is not always different in English and Spanish, but the channels that Spanish speakers and Latino communities are using to access this information is different. So we think a lot about YouTube, WhatsApp, talk radio, because the messengers for this stuff really matters. So when they're receiving these things from trusted messengers, that it's going to be more impactful than if it were coming from a source outside of the community.
Now, this question is for the whole panel, but I would like to start with ELYSE. What are the best ways people can counter disinformation?
I would say the number one way to counter disinformation is not to engage with it. Instead, pick a simple, straightforward message and stick with it. Repetition breeds familiarity and becomes a kind of background noise or a source of information in people's minds. If you must engage with disinformation, I would start questioning the messenger as well as the message. So ask why the right wing or particular politician or news source is trying to push this message. Point out what they're trying to distract you from or what they are not talking about. Ask if the person conveying the disinformation is a good source, if they have a history of lying, or if they have a history of taking money from a particular lobbying group that they are, whose goals they are supporting. If you can do this particularly in a funny way or a sarcastic way or with a short video or a good graphic, that catches people's attention even more and is a better way of getting them to think critically about what they're reading.
Elsie, what are your thoughts about this?
I think that is great advice. I think ELYSE is exactly right. Generally, we talk a lot about the need for counter messaging, right? So rather than trying to engage in an argument and disprove something that someone believes, generally speaking, it's better to put your emphasis on just making your own message louder and making sure that it is coming from a trusted messenger again. So thinking hard about the sources of sort of the content that you are trying to push out there. Some tips for that. Obviously, it helps to have compelling content that's going to generate emotions and reactions. For a lot of groups we work with, we talk about trying to line up a network of accounts that can help to engage with your content and sort of give you this algorithmic boost instead of having everyone trying to post separately on their own island. You want to get accounts interacting with each other. It's always helpful to lean into new features like video. And generally content is going to perform better if it comes from an individual rather than a brand or an organization. And then when it's time to more directly counter that information, I think ELYSE is exactly right. We often talk about a format called a truth sandwich that I think captures a lot of what ELYSE said. So people remember what they hear first and most often. This idea came from George Lakoff, who's a linguist. So the idea is you can create a truth sandwich with your messaging where you start with some sort of shared common value, show your audience, hey, we care about the same things. Then you can move to debunking. And a great way to do that is to trigger critical thinking, such as by undermining the messenger or getting people to think hard about where this information is coming from, as ELYSE said. And then you can pivot to your more proactive, positive message so you can try to move people back to sort of your perspective or the bigger truth that you're trying to convey.
And I'm happy to add some thoughts here. I think it's really important to emphasize that even though when it's like when disinformation has taken over, I think, a lot of our communications work. But at the end of the day, it still is a communications problem. But what I think it requires is that we use all the tools in the toolbox of communication So that's message development, that is aggressive pitching, aggressive media interactions, nurturing talkers that have credibility and have connections with the community. So we need to use all those tools. I do want to emphasize Kelsey's point about coordination, because actually that's something that the right really does well. As we know, they amplify their messaging and they do it very effectively. And I think that we can do so much more on that front. And also remember where people are. I think as progressive organizations, we rely a lot on Twitter. But as we've learned also from Kelsey's trainings, that's not really where people are. They are on Facebook, they are on WhatsApp, they are on closed groups. So we really need to make an assessment of where our communities are to be able to interrupt and inoculate and do all the things that we know how to do. But I also want to emphasize that it's really important for us to build trust. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have, because at the end of the day, this information is trying to create this trust in our systems, is trying to amplify this notion of chaos, and that we simply cannot trust each other, particularly our government. And I know that sometimes that's very difficult for us as advocates, because sometimes, our government disappoints us, but it's how do we sort of balance that message of like, yes, we can be advocates for our different issues, at the same time really upholding our notions of democracy and that we can trust our government, that we can trust our elections. And I think that's a message that we need to have not just around election day, particularly because the right is so intent on undermining the trust in our systems. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that front.
So incredible answers. And the only thing that I would like to add in this is when we say create your message, it doesn't mean create your message inside that thread. It's the biggest thing is not engaging, because once you engage, you start amplifying that message. And that's the last thing we want to do. So you're going to create that counter message on your own page and in your own network. And just to let you know, Battleborn Progress, we do have some programs that are specifically for anti-disinformation and inoculation. And so if you want to know more about it, you can contact Allison, who is our organic content coordinator. And we will definitely get you her information, because she is phenomenal, and that program is really going to be taking off soon. We're very excited about it. So let's talk about disinformation and elections, because we have gone through some crazy stuff during almost since 2016, but we also know that this has been brewing long before then. So this is going to be, I'm going to start with VANESSA. When did you and your organization start following this political disinformation?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, well, I came to this issue in a different way. I think the most folks have actually spent the bulk of my career on policy issues and working in different organizations and different advocacy roles, and also with campaigns. But I think for me, 2020 is sort of the first year where I was really embedded into this issue, working with Kelsey and others, trying to build a counter disinfo program. And at that time, because Trump was running for office, and we had just the GOP machine of disinformation to counter. But I think the reason why is because it's a threat to our democracy, and it's a threat to our progressive values, and it's a threat to every single issue that we care about, whether it's immigration, whether it's climate change, where it is sort of our how democracy works. So I think that to me this is such a relevant issue that and it's also both at the national and at the state level. And obviously I know we're going to talk a little bit about Nevada in specific, but I think that again this is something that we all need to sort of be looking out for and preparing for. Particularly because the right is using this information as a political strategy to advance their agenda.
Kelsey, what about you? And I absolutely agree, Vanessa.
So the firm I work for, GQR, has this longstanding background of working abroad and in other countries, and that's actually where our disinformation work stems from. So well before the 2016 U.S. election, GQR was working in elections in other countries, and we started to see things going like a little bit haywire, often on social media. We would just sort of be helping to sort of run a Facebook account or plugging into WhatsApp conversation, and we would start to see fake news before we had the term fake news. And it was actually through this work that we started to really get a better understanding of how bad actors were impacting elections, using sort of this same playbook over and over again, of these tactics that they were using to sort of influence and divide voters in different countries. And then when we started to see these same things coming back home to the US in 2016, we saw that a lot of progressive organizations were able to sort of compete with the bad stuff that was out there. But in a lot of ways, we saw that progressive organizations were still sort of relying on the same old tactics that weren't quite working. And so it's really been since 2016 that we have been applying some of what we learned abroad back home. And we have been doing this, sort of full time in the US since 2016.
And ELYSE, what about you? And progressive now.
I came on board in April 2020, just in time for the 2020 election. Initially, my colleague Victoria Gordon and I were hired to focus on disinformation in 8 key swing states, just focusing totally on the presidential election. However, post-election, we expanded our program to the whole Progress Now network of 26 states. We offer more than just in-depth listening reports now. Previously, we just focused on trending topics or politicians in those states. Now we offer rapid response reports to all of our states. We offer meltwater training so that these states can set up their own disinformation programs. We also offer influencer reports where we take a look at some of the amplifiers that Kelsey was talking about, who are the people who are going to be spreading disinformation, particularly in your state or particularly in your local area. And we also offer a help desk and other trainings.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. So I know we talked about a lot of where disinformation started in foreign countries, but it has now kind of progressed here, and we're finding that it's more in homegrown. So Vanessa, do you want to talk about where this is coming from in your area, because it is from all sides?
Yeah, no, 100%. But I do want to underscore what Kelsey said, because while it is true that there's definitely some foreign actors pushing disinformation, a lot of the disinformation that we face is homegrown. But I think with diaspora communities, the foreign actors, the foreign disinformers definitely have an impact. And one recent example, obviously, is the Brazilian elections, right, where we saw sort of such disinformation sort of chaos ahead of the election, and then we saw insurrectionists, just like we saw here on January 6th, and election deniers. And of course, that has an impact on Brazilian communities that are here in the United States. Another example of foreign sort of disinformation, it was actually around the war in Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I was really blown away by the fact that Russia TV, which has Spanish broadcasts, and they have large social media presence in Twitter and YouTube, they were out of the gate with Spanish language content. And actually, they were getting so many interactions online. And it just shows that, there are foreign actors who are investing in, again, getting to communities that they feel are influential and sort of manipulating the information that they're getting. So, and I think this is exactly why we sort of need to really focus on diaspora communities, because we have to be sort of countering not just the disinformation that they're getting domestically, but making sure that as part of our messaging and as part of our work, we're also keeping an eye out on the disinformation they're getting from their home countries.
And Vanessa, and all of you, but I think that you can answer this. My work as a manager for the Latino Anti-Disinformation program has been countering disinformation created by many. Some of these creators of disinformation are outside the United States, as you were saying. In so many cases, there is an assumption that foreign countries are the source of disinformation. Is this true?
No, it's not. I think it's a combination. You have foreign countries, you have influencers, and look, sometimes influencers that actually have a profile in other countries, they might not even have an ideology. They might just do it for profit, right? So also the reasons why people are engaged on spreading disinformation varies. But I think the bottom line for us, what can we control is the question that we need to ask ourselves. And to me, some of the suggestions that ELYSE was making make total sense. This is why we need to do the work that we need to do. We need to meet communities where they are. We need to understand the kind of narratives they are facing. We need to develop our counter messaging, but more importantly, we need to develop a proactive message of our vision of our solutions, a positive message, so that people are getting bombarded with our messaging versus what they're getting from the outside. And I think it's really important to understand how the disinfo ecosystem works, the people that are influencing our communities. But I think that it is even more important for us to develop a proactive messaging and communication strategies that really engage our communities, so that we don't have to be in crisis mode all the time trying to counter disinfo.
So I know that our audience is going to has lots of questions, and we are going to try and get to some of those questions at the end. But I'm also telling you, we're running up on our time. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions left. So if we don't get to your question, Ignacio and I will be sending out an email where we can answer your questions, because Ignacio and I both think that this is, well, it's our job, but also this is a very serious thing, and it's going to be very serious. And we saw how serious it was in our local election. In Nevada, we had our SOS candidate, Jim Marchand, was who still pushes disinformation. He follows QAnon conspiracies. I mean, it was crazy, some of the things that he was putting out. Why is this so dangerous? Really, especially in our local elections. I mean, we saw it nationally, but here locally. Anyone would like to answer? Who would like to?
Yeah, I can talk about Jim Marchand and Nevada. I mean, the reason Nevada is important generally is just because obviously your state is important electorally, right? Even though the state has sort of gone for Democratic candidates in the past presidential elections, those margins have been tight. And a lot of the elections this year were sort of frontline sort of elections to watch. And so obviously that is going to draw a lot of attention. Looking at Jim Marchand specifically, and for those of you who don't know, I'm sure your audience all knows, but he helped create this America First Secretary of State coalition that was trying to elect election deniers to Secretary of State offices. He also, claimed fraud after his 2020 congressional loss. He has ties to lots of other bad actors, including the former Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne and Robert Beadles, also in Nevada. So yeah, I mean, essentially the reason he was so dangerous, even though he didn't win, he was part of this effort to build an infrastructure and put real money and real effort into giving election deniers the sort of levers to our elections. That's a really scary prospect. particularly in a swing state like Nevada, where election outcomes have outsized importance for the country. It is really scary to think that any of those levers could be controlled by, right-wing conspiracy theorists and people who are supporting sort of anti-democratic with a low D Democrat principles, and sort of they want to undermine the right of people to choose their leaders through some of the conspiracies they believe in, policies they pursue. Jim Marchant also built this sort of persona on a business background that seems to have left him in pretty dire financial straits. He has close connections to QAnon influencers. He's been working to push conspiracies that encourage hate, white supremacy, misogyny. There's just a lot of gross stuff that comes along with this. It goes, it's bigger than just denying elections and sort of anti-democratic principles.
Yeah. And I don't know if Elise has some thoughts on this, but I would also say that Marchant also was a great embracer of this notion that of this disinformation around immigrants, right? That undocumented people could vote in election, in the great replacement theory, right? That the Democrats what they want is for Latinos and other minorities to take over white people in America, which is dangerous because, again, it is creating racial tensions. It's about amplifying hate and fear. And we know the results of that, right? That's why we have so many shootings that are driven by some of these narratives. So it is dangerous, not just at the sort of ideological level, but also in terms of really angering people and festering sort of the hate and racial animosity whites might have towards people of color. I also want to emphasize something that I was actually looking these numbers up because in the organization that I lead now, we track sort of the just GOP narratives around immigration. And I found that in Nevada, the GOP spent over $8 million in the midterms around narratives on immigration, crime, and public safety, versus Democrats, which, spent about $1 million, right? Sort of hopefully countering some of that. But just to give you a sense of just the disparity in terms of what people are hearing and consuming day in and day out, when the GOP really embraces these kinds of narratives. And of course, as you know, it wasn't just Marchant that was amplifying these messages, and they are very dangerous, not just to our democracy in the sense of undermining our electoral process, but also creating fear and hate in the population.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to build off of what Vanessa said and just point out that this specific type of candidate and this particular type of disinformation can also result in physical violence, as we have seen in states that are bordering yours, especially in New Mexico, and in the people showing up with guns to drop boxes in Arizona. So it is very important to pay attention to these things before they escalate.
The problem, as everybody knows, everybody can see, is enormous. And very fast, I want to get into the 2023 legislative session. How does disinformation play a role in the development and passage of legislation? Kelsey?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing like a lot of these sort of pushes to push policies through that are sort of solving problems that don't really exist, and they're sort of justifying these actions using a lot of false information that is circulating on social media. So good examples of that have been legislation to keep sort of quote unquote critical race theory out of schools, or to sort of tackle problems that don't exist around sort of pushing radical gender ideology in public schools. We've seen states like Florida start to champion these causes. Governor DeSantis trying to push through like the Don't Say Gay bill. And this is, again, like solving a problem that doesn't really exist. It's just a way to sort of fire up, a base of people. And they are sort of, basing this real policy decisions that are going to have real impacts on vulnerable communities. And they're basing this on sort of completely false, misleading, very much overstated problems that are circulating on social media. So it's really based in disinformation.
Yeah, and I would just add, because again, I know that at the federal level, the GOP has already said that that's part of their agenda in terms of focusing more on the border and immigration and impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. And our full expectation is that immigration is going to play a key role even at the state level, and that we're going to see a lot of efforts in passing restrictive, or at least introducing restrictive bills. But at the end of the day, they are more like messaging to just continue agitating people around immigration and immigrants and invasion and the border rhetoric. And obviously Nevada is not unfamiliar with some of these narratives.
Yeah, I would just like to add that it can also detract from important bills that need to go to the floor, or important issues that go unaddressed. People can be focusing on the latest, live du jour from Fox News, instead of something critical like giving more funding to teachers or to understaffed schools, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we have just about 1 minute left. So, really quickly, what do you see coming forward in the 2024 elections? Kelsey?
Yeah, I can take this one. So first of all, a lot of it is going to feel like Groundhog Day. We see this over and over again every election, that it's like the same stuff that is just tweaked with slightly new inputs. So we're going to continue to see election denialism. We're going to continue to see racism and anti-LGBTQ content. We're going to continue to see anti-immigrant narratives and fear-mongering about school curriculum. They'll keep sort of feeding that pipeline. A few things are changing. One thing I'm thinking about a lot is that a lot of the big social media platforms like Meta and Twitter are really struggling right now. They're sort of in a bad way. Elon Musk is allowing previously banned right-wing accounts back. Trump is sort of petitioning to be allowed back on Facebook. At the same time, we've got social media shifting to video and starting to prioritize content creators over sort of relationships in your sort of friend network. So it could be that we get like a new wave of sort of bad actor influencers who are able to capitalize on some of those new video trends. But that's also an opportunity for progressives to sort of get ahead of those trends, because I think everyone is still adjusting. I also think if 2024 does become a Biden-Trump race, I worry a little bit about how to keep voters engaged. If it's just going to feel like we're doing the same thing again, it could be easier for bad actors to sort of engage their base with fear and disinformation, while progressive voters sort of struggle to find motivation.
So that is a lot that we have to look forward to, not in the greatest way. And I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for this panel. And we are done. And like I said, Ignacio and I will work on those questions that you all put in the chat. So thank you so much for everything.
All right, everyone, thank you. And thank you, Lisa and Ignacio, and all of our fabulous panelists for that fabulous panel. It was excellent. Lisa and Ignacio are going to actually answer some of those questions that came in during the panel in your chat. So go and meet Lisa and Ignacio. They're going to be wandering around during this break, and all of our team is going to be wandering around during this break with their cameras on. So now is a good time to go to the tabling tables, meet our sponsors, meet all of our fabulous partners we work in the community with. And we're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we will be back with you shortly. Now, don't leave. This next panel is going to be excellent. We're going to be talking all about voting rights, and Brian Harris, who is our voting rights organizer, is going to be back with so much information, so many good panelists on this next panel, so you're going to want to join us. Remember, go talk to people. Just double-click on the tables, and you can join the tables and talk to people and get involved. Sign up to volunteer for this legislative session, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you shortly.